"She won't find it," the boy said, plain as anything, not looking up from the checkerboard he was arranging on the kitchen table. "I put it under the floorboard by the stove." Sarah Calloway stood in the doorway of the schoolroom that doubled as a kitchen in the Holt farmhouse, her carpet bag at her feet, her return ticket to Cincinnati, or the space where that ticket had been, suddenly very much on her mind. She looked at the boy. He was 6 years old, with his father's dark brows and a gap where his front tooth had been since March. His name was Thomas Holt, and he had apparently decided, in the quiet, deliberate way small children sometimes decide enormous things, that she was not going anywhere. "Thomas." She kept her voice level. "That ticket belongs to me." "I know," he set a red checker on the board with great care. "Papa says a thing that belongs to you is yours to keep, so I'm keeping it for you, so you don't lose it." The logic of it was so thoroughly bulletproof that Sarah almost laughed. She set her bag down instead and pulled out the chair across from him, because her legs had gone a little strange, and she sat. Through the window behind the boy's head she could see the Colorado sky going amber at the edges, the kind of sky that had no business being so beautiful when a woman had a train to catch, or had thought she did. She had come to Holt Creek in September to teach the 8 children of this scattered valley for 1 school term. That had been the agreement. 1 term, a wage of $30, room and board in the farmhouse belonging to Gideon Holt, widower, who had organized the parents and built the 1-room school himself from pine planks and stubbornness. She had not come to stay. She had a room waiting in Cincinnati, a cousin's spare bed, a possibility of a post at a proper city school. She had made no promises beyond January. That was what she had told herself for 4 months. Thomas moved a checker. "Your turn," he said. Sarah looked at the board. She looked at the boy. She picked up a black checker and moved it 1 square, and somewhere across the yard she heard the barn door swing open on its iron hinge, and heavy boots crossed the frozen ground toward the house. Gideon Holt was not a man who announced himself. He simply arrived. He came through the door stamping snow from his boots, pulling his coat from his shoulders before he registered that Sarah was still in his kitchen at 4:30, when she ought to have been in the wagon headed for the depot at Miller's Crossing. He went still in the way of a man who has taught himself not to react too quickly to things that surprise him. "Miss Calloway," his voice was low and unhurried, the way he said most things. "I thought Elias was taking you to the station." He was. Sarah looked at Thomas, who was studying the checkerboard with the focused calm of a boy who has nothing whatsoever to hide. "It seems something has come up." Gideon followed her gaze to his son. A long quiet settled over the kitchen. "Thomas Elias Holt," he said. "In that particular register fathers have that means the middle name is no accident. What did you do?" Thomas looked up without any visible guilt. "I kept her ticket safe." Gideon closed his eyes briefly. He pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, slow, like a man preparing himself. He set his hat on the table and rubbed the back of his neck. When he looked at Sarah again, his expression was complicated, and she had learned in 4 months that complicated from Gideon Holt was the equivalent of a soliloquy from anyone else. "I'll pay for a new ticket," he said, "and I'll drive you myself, first thing tomorrow." "The next eastbound doesn't run until Thursday," Sarah said. Another silence. "Then I'll pay for 3 nights at the Miller's boarding house." "Mr. Holt," Sarah folded her hands on the table, "I think before we spend money on boarding houses we might have a conversation." He looked at her steadily. He had gray eyes, the kind that caught light like still water. "All right," he said. "A conversation." Thomas slipped off his chair without a word and padded into the back room, pulling the curtain behind him with the tact of a child who has accomplished exactly what he set out to accomplish. Sarah had not planned this. She wanted that understood, at least within herself. She was not a romantic woman by nature. She was practical, the daughter of a schoolmaster from a small Ohio town, trained to keep her expectations modest and her accounts in order. She had come west with both eyes open. She had not planned to sit across from this quiet, serious man in the last light of a Colorado afternoon and propose that she stay. But Thomas had taken her ticket, and the sky was going dark, and the stew pot on the back of the stove was beginning to smell the way it always did on Tuesdays when Gideon put rosemary in, and she was very tired of the idea of Cincinnati. "I'll say it plainly," she started, because plainness was something he understood. "The Valley needs a school teacher, and I am a good one. Your arrangement for next term is not secured. I know because Mrs. Aldridge told me last week that the woman they'd written to in Denver has declined." His expression shifted by a fraction. "You knew that." "I did. And you were still going to leave." "I thought I was," she said. "I appear to have been mistaken." He was quiet for a moment. The fire in the stove ticked softly. "What are you proposing, Miss Calloway?" She kept her voice even. "A second term, same wage, same board. But I think we should also discuss something more practical." "More practical?" "The children in this valley need continuity. A teacher who comes for a term and leaves again gives them nothing they can build on. What they need, what you need, if you're going to keep that school running, is someone with a reason to stay." She paused. "I need a reason too." Gideon studied his hat on the table. "You're talking about a permanent arrangement. I'm talking about a practical one. A contract, if you like. A proper one." She took a careful breath. "I'm talking about marriage, Mr. Holt. A sensible marriage between two people who understand what they're agreeing to. I would teach the school. You would keep the farm. Thomas would have someone steady, and we would both have—" She stopped herself and chose the word with care. "Security." The word sat between them, plain and honest and a little bare. He didn't answer right away. He looked at her long enough that she began to take inventory of the room, the pine table, the two chairs that were unmatched because one had come from his mother's house in Kansas and one he had built himself last winter, the shelf where he kept his Bible and a broken compass he had never thrown away. "You're a sensible woman," he said at last. "I try to be." "And you don't," he paused, chose carefully, the way she had. "You don't expect more than what you've named." "I expect honesty," Sarah said, "and to be treated fairly. The rest we negotiate." He picked up his hat and turned it in his hands once, then set it down again. "My wife has been gone 3 years," he said. "I'm not—" Another stop. "I'm not an easy man to live with." "You're quieter than most," she agreed. "But you are kind. I have watched you for 4 months, Mr. Holt. A man can hide his manners for a week, maybe 2. He cannot hide them for 4 months." Something moved behind his eyes. "You were watching." "I'm a teacher." "Watching is the work." He almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, but it was close enough that she felt it, the way you feel a door in a cold house come open toward warmth. "I have conditions," he said. "I'd expect nothing less. You make your own decisions about the school. I don't interfere with what or how you teach. The farm is mine to run as I see fit. Same rule. If something troubles either of us, we say it straight. We don't let it sit and fester." He looked at her. "And Thomas? He doesn't get to run this household." "Absolutely not," Sarah said with some feeling. "You'd have the east bedroom, your own room." "Yes. And if it doesn't suit—" He stopped. "We renegotiate," she said quietly, "like sensible people." He was quiet for a long time then, long enough that Sarah heard the wind pick up outside, heard it press against the window glass, heard the sound of the valley getting dark and cold in the way it did when another night of winter settled in, and you were very grateful to be inside with a fire. "All right," Gideon Holt said. Just that, all right, as though the rest of it were simply the next thing to be done. "All right," Sarah said back. Thomas appeared at the curtain with the timing of a prophet. "Does this mean you're staying?" he asked. Gideon looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at Gideon. A breath of something passed between them that wasn't love yet, not even close, but was the honest beginning of a possibility neither of them was willing to name too soon. "Go to bed, Thomas," his father said. "But does she?" "Bed." Thomas disappeared with a speed that confirmed he'd been listening the entire time. Sarah pressed her lips together to keep from smiling. Gideon, she noticed, was looking at the window, which meant he was probably doing the same. Reverend Marsh married them on a Thursday, which was the same day the eastbound train left Miller's Crossing, and Sarah thought that was probably not a coincidence in any direction that mattered. The Reverend was a compact, serious man who conducted the ceremony in the parlor of the schoolhouse with Mrs. Aldridge and the Brennan brothers standing witness, their hats held to their chests. It was brief. It was proper. There was no music and no flowers, because January in Colorado argued against both, but Gideon had swept the floor the night before, and Sarah noticed that without anyone remarking on it. She wore her second-best dress, which was green wool, because her best dress was a summer thing, and this was emphatically not summer. He wore his good coat, the one he normally kept for church, and he had cut his hair. She noticed that too. When Reverend Marsh asked if they took each other of their own free will, they both said yes without hesitation, and meant it in the way that a contract is meant, fully and with their eyes open. There was no wedding supper. There was, however, the rosemary stew, and Thomas had been allowed to stay up late on account of the occasion, and he ate 2 bowls and announced that this was the best Thursday he could remember, and Gideon told him he could not possibly remember enough Thursdays to make that judgment, and Thomas said he was going to remember this one forever, and something about the plainness of it, the ordinariness, the fire and the stew and the boy's face lit up across the table, pressed on Sarah's chest in a way she refused to examine too closely. After supper, Gideon washed the dishes without being asked, which she had already learned was simply what he did. She dried them and put them away. They worked in a silence that was not uncomfortable, which she filed away as a good sign, because she had grown up in a house where silence at the end of a long day meant something had gone wrong, and this silence did not feel like that. It felt like 2 people who had agreed to share a life, and were already, quietly, beginning to do it. He said good night at the door of the east bedroom without ceremony. She said good night back. That was all. She lay awake for a while listening to the wind and thinking that she had done something either very sensible or very strange, and it was too early to know which. Winter in Holt Creek did not ease up to let a person adjust. It pressed on the farmhouse with a patience that felt personal, piling snow against the door, cracking the water barrel in the yard, turning the path to the schoolroom into a thing that had to be negotiated each morning like an argument. Sarah negotiated it. She taught her 8 students, 12 now because the Brennan family had sent 2 more since November, and she came back to the house each afternoon with her coat white at the shoulders and her fingers needing to be held near the stove before they would bend properly. Gideon began to have the fire in the kitchen burning high by the time she came back from school. She did not ask him to. He did not mention that he had. He simply had, each day, reliably, the way a man tends to a thing he has decided deserves tending. She noticed other things accumulating, slow as snow. A second chair appeared at the writing table in the east bedroom, her bedroom, one morning in early February, set at an angle by the window where the light came in best, with a candle already in the holder on the sill. She said nothing about it. She used it every evening for her lesson preparation, and the chair was exactly the right height, and she did not think that was an accident. He fixed the schoolroom door so it didn't stick in the cold. He repaired the hinge on her carpet bag without telling her he'd done it. He began buying coffee at the Mercantile instead of only chicory, because she had mentioned once, at breakfast, that she missed real coffee, and she had mentioned it only once. She, in her turn, kept the accounts, because she had seen in the first week that numbers were not his preference, and the ledger on the shelf was 3 months behind. She mended his coat and Thomas's good shirt. She started a kitchen garden plan in the back of her grade book against the coming spring, drawing the beds to scale the way her father had taught her. When the water barrel cracked, she wrote to her cousin in Cincinnati, who had a husband in the cooperage trade, and arranged a replacement at a better price than Gideon had been quoted. "You didn't have to do that," he said when the letter came back with the figure. "It wanted doing," she said. He looked at the letter and then at her, and again she saw that thing behind his eyes that wasn't quite anything she had a name for yet, but it was accumulating alongside everything else. The trouble began in the way most trouble did on the frontier, quietly, with paperwork. A man named Harcourt appeared in Miller's Crossing in late February, representing a land company out of Denver that had taken interest in the water rights along Holt Creek. He was a city man in a new coat, and he had documents, and he was talking to every landowner in the valley about an arrangement that would, he explained with great warmth, benefit everyone. What it would benefit, Sarah understood when she sat down with the papers Gideon brought home, was the company. What it would cost was the creek. Gideon read the papers at the kitchen table with the stillness he brought to everything difficult. Thomas was in bed. The fire was low. "They're not wrong that it's legal," he said finally. "That something is legal doesn't make it right," Sarah said. "And it isn't entirely legal either. Look at the clause on page 3. She set her finger on the line. "They're claiming prior rights to water from an 1881 survey, but the Brennans have a homestead filing from 1880 that establishes secondary use of that same stretch. If the Brennans' filing holds, this whole document falls apart." He looked at the page. Then he looked at her. "How do you know that?" "My father was a schoolmaster who also kept the county clerk's records for 11 years, she said. "I grew up reading title documents. I found it," she paused. "I found it tedious at the time. It appears to have been useful." Something in his expression did a thing she hadn't seen before. It softened, a specific, careful softening, like ice on a south-facing slope in March. "Sarah," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name without Thomas being the reason for it. She felt it, the shift of it. She kept her voice steady. "We need to get the Brennan filing and take it to a solicitor in Miller's Crossing before Harcourt circulates those documents further. If we can show the prior claim, the company loses their argument. The solicitor will want payment. I have $14 saved from my wage. I won't take your money for this." "You're not taking it. I'm investing it." She looked at him levelly. "This is my valley too, Mr. Holt. These are my students' families. I have a stake in what happens here." He held her gaze for a long moment. The fire ticked. Somewhere outside, the wind moved through the pine trees with a sound like water, which was almost funny given the circumstances. "All right," he said, in exactly the tone he had used in January, the tone of the contract, honored. But when he rode to the Brennan place the next morning, he came back with something unexpected. Harcourt's man had already visited the Brennans and 3 other families, and 2 of them, frightened by the legal language, had already initialed the preliminary agreement. The situation was worse than the papers alone had shown. The meeting happened in the schoolroom, which was the largest room in the valley that wasn't a barn. Gideon called it, and 12 men came, and 4 women, and Sarah sat to one side with the Brennan filing and the 3 volumes of land law she had sent for from the lending library in Miller's Crossing, which had arrived, providentially, the morning before. Harcourt himself appeared, uninvited, which Sarah thought showed either confidence or poor judgment. She suspected both. He was polished and patient, the way men who have practiced persuasion become polished and patient. and he explained the company's position with the kind of calm that was designed to make resistance feel unreasonable. He had surveyor's maps. He had the preliminary agreements, already signed by 2 families, which he placed on the table where everyone could see them. Sarah let him finish. Then she stood up, which was something she did every day at the front of a schoolroom, and she placed the Brennan filing on the table beside Harcourt's maps, and she explained, in the plain language she used when she was teaching a difficult concept to children who needed to understand it all the way down to the bone, exactly what the 1880 filing meant, and exactly what it did to the 1881 survey on which Harcourt's entire claim rested. The room was very quiet when she finished. Harcourt looked at the filing. He looked at her. He was a man who was accustomed to reading rooms, and this room was not reading the way he had planned. "I'll need to consult with our legal representation," he said. "Of course," Sarah said pleasantly. "You should also know that I have written to the Territorial Land Office in Denver and to the County Register, requesting a review of the survey records, and that I expect responses within the month." She paused. "The families who initialed your preliminary agreement may wish to speak with a solicitor before those reviews are complete." Just as a precaution, Harcourt left before the meeting was officially closed. He did not take his maps. Gideon walked her back across the yard in the late afternoon light, and he didn't say anything for a while, which was normal. And then he said, "You wrote to Denver." "3 days ago," she said, "when I first saw the documents. Before the meeting. I like to be prepared." He stopped walking. She stopped too, because when Gideon Holt stopped moving, he generally had a reason. He looked at her in the way he had of looking at things he was deciding about, slow and straight on. "What made you stay?" he asked. It was not what she expected him to say. She thought about Thomas and the return ticket and the checkerboard. She thought about rosemary stew and the chair by the window and 14 months of quiet accumulation. She thought about what she had written in her letter to her cousin in Cincinnati 2 weeks ago. The letter she had said was about the water barrel, but which had been, in truth, about something else entirely. "I think," she said slowly, "I stayed because this place needed something I could give it, and then I stayed because—" She stopped, looked at the farm, the house, the smoke from the chimney going straight up in the cold, still air. "I stayed because the thought of leaving felt like a loss I wasn't willing to take." "A loss of what?" His voice was quiet and careful, the way he was when he most wanted to hear the answer. She looked at him. "You know what?" she said. He stood there in the cold Colorado light, and she could see him deciding, the way she had watched him decide things for a year and a half, slowly, thoroughly, because he was not a man who made promises he didn't intend to keep. And then he reached out and took her hand, which was the most declarative thing she had ever seen him do, because Gideon Holt was not a man of grand gestures. It was just her hand, held in his, in the yard, with the smoke going up and the light going gold. "I know what," he said. "The land company withdrew its claim in April, after the Territorial Office confirmed the Brennan filing's validity. 2 of the families in the valley signed over a small parcel of timber rights to cover the solicitor's fee as a shared obligation, and that was negotiated over coffee in the schoolroom, and Sarah handled the paperwork, and Gideon witnessed the signatures, and the Brennan patriarch shook both their hands and called them a fine pair, which made Gideon look at the floor and Sarah look at the window, and both of them were very busy for a moment. Spring came the way spring comes in Colorado, in fits and arguments, snow on Wednesday and mud on Friday, the creek running high and loud with everything that had been waiting all winter. Sarah's kitchen garden went in on the first Saturday in May, and Gideon dug the beds the way she had planned them, following the drawing in the back of her grade book without asking her to explain the reasoning, which she appreciated. Thomas planted a row of carrots with the focus of a man completing vital work, and then announced that he would also like a dog, which was rejected on the grounds that they had enough going on, and Thomas accepted this with the philosophical grace of a boy who has learned that patience frequently works. On the last Sunday before the summer term began, Gideon Holt took a small thing from his coat pocket and held it out to her across the kitchen table. It was a length of blue ribbon, plain and practical, the kind you could buy at the mercantile for a nickel, but it was the particular blue of her second-best dress, the green wool one she had worn in January, which meant he had been thinking about it for a while. "I'm not good at speeches," he said. "I know," she said, "and this isn't much." "It's enough," she said, and took it, and he watched her tie it into her hair, and the look on his face was not the look of a man fulfilling a contract. Reverend Marsh, who happened to be visiting for Sunday dinner, observed all of this from his chair by the fire and said nothing at all, which was by some measure the most pastoral thing he had ever done. That evening, after Thomas was in bed and the dishes were done, Sarah and Gideon sat on the porch in the late light that comes to the mountains in June, when the days last long enough that you feel almost extravagant with the hours. The creek made its sound in the distance. The garden was beginning. Everything that had been a contract was now something else, something that didn't have a name in any ledger, but was as solid as the porch boards under their feet, and as deliberate as a second chair placed in a window where the light comes in best. "Sarah," he said. "Yes," she said, before he had finished the sentence, because she had known him for long enough now to know where some sentences were going, and she was done pretending otherwise. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, the rarest thing he produced, and therefore the most valuable, and he took her hand again in the evening light, and they sat there together, in the particular peace that belongs to two people who chose each other with their eyes open and have not once regretted it. Here is what this story wants you to know, and what I hope you'll carry with you past the last word of it. Sometimes love doesn't announce itself with roses or moonlight speeches. Sometimes it arrives in the form of a 6-year-old boy who hides your return ticket under a floorboard because he can see what the adults around him are too dignified to admit. A practical arrangement, made honestly between two honest people, can become the most genuine thing either of them has ever known. What makes a home isn't a grand declaration. It's a chair placed where the light falls best, a fire already burning when you come in from the cold, a ribbon in the exact right color chosen quietly by someone who was paying attention all along. If that spoke to your heart tonight, will you leave a comment and tell me, was there a moment in this story when you knew those two were meant to keep each other? I'd love to hear, and if you want more journeys like this one, stories of ordinary people making something lasting out of hard country and honest hearts, please subscribe so you won't miss a single one. Good night. God bless you and yours, wherever this evening finds you.